Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last conference of this series 2024. Today, we are going to address a very interesting topic, Cyberthreat Landscape, lessons learned from 2023 and what to expect in 2024 and beyond. I have the honor to share the stage today with Kristof Philipsen from Verizon and Mauricio Nanne from Sistemas Aplicativos. So even though you already know them, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, thank you, Irwin, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you and the audience here. Much of a privilege. So thank you very much. So I'm Kristof Philipsen. I'm the senior managing director over Verizon's cybersecurity consulting team. I've been with Verizon for about 23 years now, both in roles here in the United States as well as internationally, predominantly in the European market that I spent some time. Um, Outside of Verizon, I also sit on the ISC2 North American Advisory Council. So I do a lot of work in terms of cybersecurity education, including the informing of the national cybersecurity strategy here in the United States that was released earlier in the year when it pertains to cybersecurity and cybersecurity staffing and approaches there. So thank you very much and look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Very impressive experience. So Mauricio, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's it's an honor to be in the same screen as Chris. Thank you very much, Chris and Irwin. So I have been in the business of technology since 1976 or something. Yes, very long time. And in security since 1996. So we have seen things happen, and we have things not happen, and people come and go. But yeah, we have been very fortunate to be part of this new world of technology, of the web, of the cloud, of artificial intelligence. So we are really, really excited of what has happened, the good, really sad of what has happened, the bad, and really looking forward to the future. So thank you very much for having me again.
Thank you, Mauricio. So like I mentioned before, we are going to address Cyberthreat Landscape. And we are going to start with the first part, that is, what lessons can we learn from 2023? So Chris, we are going to start with you. What changed, or did something change in 2023? Or we continue to struggle with the same cyber attacks, same techniques and tactics from cyber criminals?
And that's a good point, right? And we always typically retrospectively look back in the beginning of the year at what has changed and what has shifted. And one good way of doing that, right, is you guys are probably familiar with Verizon's Data Breach Investigations Report, which we've been publishing for about 16 years now. And it's always a good reference to look at how things trended in the industry year over year. So one thing I will say is that adversaries, so the bad folks, are unlikely to change their tactics as long as their existing tactics continue to work. As long as people are clicking on links, as long as people are installing malware or giving up credentials, the adversary gets what they want, and there's no need for them to change the tactics. And one of the things that we continue seeing year over year is that there's a few ways that the bad people get into organizations. The first is the use of stolen credentials. They're able to get the credentials that are maybe disclosed in a data breach, replay them, because a lot of people use the same credentials for business and non-business purposes. So if their personal accounts get hacked, they're then able to get into their corporate accounts. Phishing continues to be a big issue as well. I think we all see it, and we all get a little bit better with every phishing training that we do. But then also the exploitation of vulnerabilities, and we see it on every scale, right? Vulnerabilities getting exploited on the desktops, on the servers, on mobile devices, on cloud instances, and I think more notably in the last few years, on security devices that we trust, devices such as VPN concentrators or firewalls which are now being used as a pivoting point by attackers because they're considered a trusted component. They have access to a lot of other entities and assets within the organization. So if you can breach that, you can obviously get into a lot of the organization. And another thing is the human element, right? I think the weakest link in any type of cybersecurity posture and cybersecurity program is typically the human. And a lot of times this is driven by inadvertent behavior. It's not that the humans are necessarily doing malicious things on purpose. They're often tricked into doing something, or they commit an error that then causes an attacker to be able to compromise or breach the organization. So I think broadly, those main tactics remain. However, there are a few things that stood out in 2023, and two main things, right? Number one, ransomware. You hear it all the time. You can't miss it when you turn on the news and you hear about an organization getting hit because of ransomware breach, and impacting their production or potentially their operations and their business. But what we have seen is that it's tapered off, so it has plateaued since 2022. It's still very important. It's about 25% of the breaches that has a ransomware component to it, based upon our latest data breach reports. But it has tapered off. It hasn't increased exponentially as it has over the last few years. So that's somewhat of a good story. And then the second thing that I would say is that pretexting, so attackers creating scenarios that are fake scenarios, like, for example, doing wire transfers, financial transactions, things like business email compromises, that has massively increased. And I think that's because organizations have gotten somewhat better at protecting against ransomware. I'm not saying that they're taking care of all the ransomware, but there's better controls and better awareness. So the attackers have shifted their tactics to start using things like pretexting and business email compromise to achieve their objectives.
Very interesting point. So even though cyber criminals are getting creative by the time, they're still using same tactics and techniques. So probably we are not doing enough to protect our organizations, but we need to take into consideration that in order to protect our organization, we need to convince the executive board as well about cyber risk. So Mauricio, this question is for you from a CEO perspective. Do you think it's affecting the organizations that the cyber risk decisions are being made not by the executive board, but by the operational level?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question, and it's very, very on the nail. So, risk is the probability of a bad thing happening, and the cost that would represent to the company if it happens. And as we understand security, it is reducing our vulnerability in the organization, so bad things do not happen. And if they do, how do we minimize the impact, and how do we recover as fast as possible to keep the mission of the organization going? So the risk decisions should be made by the owners of the organization. And the board directors are the people that have the mandate from the owners. Many times the board directors are owners as well. But they have the mandate, and the upper management has their mandate to make the decisions, the strategic decisions of the companies or of any organization. And risk decisions, cyber risk decisions, are in this realm. So these risk decisions should be made by upper management or the board of directors. The problem is that we as an industry have not been able to take the message to the correct players of what this risk means, how if it crystallizes, it will damage the organization. What's the cost of this damage? And counter to that, if we do controls, we implement controls, we deploy defensive technology, etc., how we will reduce the risk. So all this information of what the risk is, how does it look like, who are the adversaries, what are they looking for in my organization? Where is that information that the adversaries are looking to damage or to steal or to share illegally, and understand all this scenario, and then what the controls would be and what the cost, not only monetary, but in effort of the organization, and sometimes at the cost of ease. We do want to make it easy to our customers, to our coworkers, to work with the technology. And sometimes ease and security are not in the same plane. One goes up, the other one goes down. So we have to figure out how to do it easy and fast without compromising security. Now, these decisions should be made by the uppermost authority with the proper information. And that is where we are failing. We're not taking all this information to the upper management. So I'll tell you a very short story. A company had an incident that cost them a lot of money. And when we went to look at their infrastructure, we saw that they did not have multi-factor authentication for any of their remote accesses, even mail or anything else. So we asked them, look, why is it not implemented? Because you do have the technology in place, but it's not implemented. And the answer of the CEO was, I never knew this could happen. I never knew we already had it. And I didn't know that this thing that we already had would make it more difficult for the adversaries to make this damage. So who made the decision? The decision was made by an engineer of the contractor that installed the solution. And he thought it was going to be too difficult for the users or the executives of the organization to use multi-factor authentication, and didn't implement it. So here it's worse because it was the engineer of a contractor who made that risk decision that cost the company a lot of money. So yeah, definitely we need to learn how to take these decisions with the correct information to the upper management for them to make the risk decisions.
Thank you, Mauricio. So cyber risk decisions should be made by upper management, but operational levels should be able to communicate and recommend what is working and what is not working. So in order to help the audience that is with us today, Chris, what do you think is working against cyber attacks and what is not working against cyber attacks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good question, right? And I gotta, I'll pivot off what Mauricio said as well. Getting the right data points is just so important. And obviously, ultimately, the accountability lies within the organization, the executives and the board of an organization. When there is an incident, they're typically held personally liable or corporate liable for that, right? So it's important to understand and have the right data points for that, right? Now, what is working well, I think, looking at the trends and kind of the trends year over year, I would say organizations have started looking at things like, ransomware, and that being a big problem to them, because it brings down production, it brings down operational capabilities, and ultimately customers may decide to switch to another organization as a partner just because of the fact that there's reliability concerns and potentially liability concerns as well. So I think organizations have started investing more and more in resiliency, being able to make sure that backups are up to speed, investing in strategies to be able to quickly recover as well when there is a cyber incident, because it's all about detecting. Detecting is very important, but they always talk about the fact that a security incident is not an if, it's typically a when. And when that does happen, you got to be able to respond quicker. And I think a lot of organizations have started making that shift, which I think is a good thing. And we're starting to see that those fruits of that labor by some of the data points that we're seeing about ransomware somewhat tapering off. Although that's still a long road, I do think resiliency are things that organizations have started doing better. And also, I think there's increased legislation on things like SBOM, so software bill of materials, and we're seeing this here in the United States, but also internationally, where software vendors, which may and this could be partners as well, with the example that that Mauricio provided, where decisions that are made by software vendors or partners are being scrutinized a lot closer, whereby those companies can be held liable when there is a breach or when their software is insecure. So more and more, there's a shift towards secure by design by suppliers, vendors, software makers, etc. So I think that's good. I think what hasn't worked well and where we're still seeing some issues are third and fourth party risk. We have a lot of information out there. We share a lot of information with our partners because either processes tell us to do so or we need to do that for the business. And that continues to be an issue. And the third party risk is obviously those are external parties to you, but the fourth party risk are external parties to third parties, right? So say you work with a vendor that manages your network or that manages your systems, or that does maintenance, they may also have third parties, right? So it's that transient chain of potential compromise, right? That is an important key factor, and that's how sometimes data leaks out, and then that data is used in an effort to be able to breach your organization. And then I do think that there's still some things that haven't worked well in terms of the business email compromise. Attackers have shifted a little bit in terms of their tactics. They're using artificial intelligence and some of the other capabilities to make their attacks a lot more effective, to make them a lot more lucrative, and to make them a lot more realistic when it comes to trying to convince somebody to do something, whether it's with a phish or a pretexting attack. And I think those are things that we're still falling for as a community, and that we need to do better at as well.
Great. I like what you said. Cybersecurity incident is not an if thing, it's a when. So we need to be prepared. And you also mentioned ransomware. Mauricio, I know for a fact that SISAP has helped a lot of organizations in the past and still continues to help these organizations with ransomware attacks. So do you think it's all news? Organizations are getting used to be attacked by ransomware or not?
Oh boy, no, not at all. This is very current news, and as a matter of fact, today I am in a conference that most of the what is being talked about is ransomware. So no, it's not going anywhere. In our geographies, possibly the rest of the world, or U.S. and Europe, it has plateaued. I think it has not in Latin America. At least in Central America, we are seeing more and more every day. And as in all technology, our countries are a little behind US and Europe. So definitely we haven't seen that plateau yet. So in our different units that are digital incident response and forensics, we are receiving increasing number of calls for help. We do have some really interesting success stories, and we would like to see more of those. Which are the success stories? Well, to begin, I think every day that goes by and I did not get a successful attack is a mini success story. And we should be happy for that. But we should be very, very aware that it will happen soon, as both Chris and Irwin said. So this success story is interesting. This is a customer that the SOC saw some interesting alerts, and the SOC got in touch with the incident response team that immediately went into action, and they found out that at that moment the ransomware was not installed yet. The bad actor was within the network and was setting up whatever he would use to exfiltrate the information and then install the ransom, the ciphering or the encrypting module and we could stop the whole thing from happening before it happened. And that was a really good success story. So that tells us that we are not doomed by this if we do the correct things. And basically, the correct things was have a really modern EDR solution and management of that EDR solution that will give us the correct alerts, and then the processes to be able to escalate quickly, to be able to understand what is happening and stop it from happening, and without tearing down the organization. Either the bad guys do it, encrypting all our servers or whatever they can, or we do it, disconnecting from the network and disconnecting from the service, the internet, because all our customers and all our employees won't be able to work anyway. So that's a happy story, a happy ending, and definitely the idea is to bring the message that we're not doomed, that things can and should be done. One of the problems that we're having a lot is incorrect information. Correct information about the defenses, about our own resiliency capacities, and so our capability to respond or recover is very reduced. So we should be taking a very deep look at our defenses, our processes, and our resiliency capabilities, and testing them constantly. So when it happens, we are ready, and we will be able to recover if it destroys information, and we will be able to continue business as usual fast. We don't want to start all over again, as someone that I know happened. Is just redo the service from zero, and everything that had taken years and years to perfect was lost. So that's what definitely we do not want. So ransomware attacks are here, and they're not going away very soon in our region. Thanks.
So that was the story of the ransomware that almost happened but didn't. That's a great story.
Exactly.
So, Chris.
And of course, everybody has really good stories, and we shouldn't be like, oh boy, doing the wolf story every day. There are wolves, but they're good shepherds that can push them away. So we can do that. And definitely, this is not a lost cause, not a lost war at all.
Thank you. So, Chris, we were talking about ransomware some weeks ago, and you mentioned that even though ransomware is going to impact an organization, it's just a short-term problem. There are far more impact to the organization in the long term. Could you please elaborate a little bit about that?
No, sure, and that's a good question, right? Because when anybody hears about ransom, they automatically think about ransomware. And I think what's interesting is that, this is just an interesting anecdote. Cyber insurance companies, which is a big thing right now in terms of getting cyber insurance, they've started moving away from the term ransomware and changing it to extortion, because basically it's a broader category of potential extortion of an entity or an individual, right? And while ransomware is one of those different types of attack vectors within the ransom category, it's typically a lot broader, and ransom can really continue to haunt organizations for years to come. And a good example of that, an analogy that I like to use here, is that if I'm at home and I have an internet service provider that I use to connect the internet from my house, if they get hit with a ransomware attack and they're down for, say, 2 days as a result of this, I'm going to be very unhappy. I gotta deal with not being able to connect to my work applications. I gotta have to deal with my wife complaining that she can't visit sites or go to her favorite Netflix show. My daughter's at home not being able to see YouTube Kids, and it's going to be a crisis in the house, right? But at the end of the day, the internet's going to come back up at some point, and typically maybe in 2 days, the internet will be back up, and maybe 2 weeks later, I may have forgotten about the event somewhat. So typically, ransomware is really designed to inflict very short, quick, heavy pain by the attacker to get you to pay up, right? But I think if we take that same example, say an attacker breaches my internet service provider, and they can start looking at what sites I'm visiting, what banks I'm using, what political affiliations that I have, things that I may not need the world to know about me or my family. If that information is leaked, is out there, and the attackers, they may or may not release it. They may keep it over your head, right? Although there's no immediate impact, that could very significant long-term impact, right? The long-term damage of these types of breaches and that ransom could potentially be much worse than ransomware, because that could be out there for years to come, and you don't know where that data is. You don't know who has that data. So it's kind of the sustained, slow agony and pain that can play a psychological game on the victim. So ransom is a very broad category, and I think we see attackers starting to shift, right? Ransomware is a big one. That's kind of what you all see in the news, because organizations go down for long periods of time, but data exfiltration and keeping that data hostage, or using that for extortion, is certainly something that's very impactful and that we're seeing more and more of, unfortunately.
Okay, very interesting point. So it's not just about having a good backup strategy. However, we need that backup strategy. Every organization needs it. So talking about that, Mauricio, this question is for you. Have you seen that some processes or practices still need to be improved regarding backup strategies?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's go back a little in time. We invented backups because they're the possible problems of a computer going down, a disk crashing, and we needed to recover that information and start again. Eventually, we got into the high availability and getting two data centers that are synchronized and everything, and that is correct to do it for that type of risks. That would be, let's say, the hardware problem, or even the services problem, or even electricity problem, and to keep the services up. The problem with the ransomware is if it might go to the other data that is in the backup, or in the high availability, or in the other data center that is synchronized. And so that is not a defense. Of course, what we need to have is disconnected or vaulted or protected backups. So the idea is that if we, or when we get the malware that will try to encrypt, or that will encrypt, it will not be able to get to the backup. So the backup will be the source of the data that will get us up and running again. Now, to Chris's problem, yeah, there are some solutions, and I want to, maybe some of the people in the audience remember that we had a giveaway many years ago that was called Plan B, and Plan B was a wire cutter, and it was a joke, right? If everything else fails, Plan B is cut the wire. But there is a Plan B for the data that might be exfiltrated. So one of the things that we are not doing is we're not making possibly a really good inventory of the data that can be really sensitive when it's out of our control. But if we do, and we find that the data of, let's say, of employees or of customers or of patients, and depending on the legislation and in the type of organization, but if we do this inventory and we decide that this data is highly critical and should not be in the wild or outside our control ever, what we do is encrypt it inside the information, the organization. So if the attackers or the, the adversaries are able to exfiltrate the data, it will be useless to them until we get to the next point of cryptography. But in the meantime, it's a good possibility. So I have seen very few companies in our region that are doing this inventory of the information and encrypting inside the organization. Not only the backup must be encrypted, but the data that is in use. Not easy, but yes, it can be done. So the recommendation, if you are a victim of ransomware, or if you see strange things happening or strange alerts coming out of your defenses, immediately get a defense team to help you understand what is happening, how to stop it, and how to, if things started happening, how to stop and recover. And definitely the defense team will help you from this becoming something really, really big.
Yeah,
So, but yeah,
go ahead,
backup
sorry.
is definitely needs to have a good look into it.
Totally. And in the same line of reasoning of protecting data with backups, I'm protecting backups by encrypting that data. So even the decryption process seems to pose some risk because cyber criminals are getting creative, like we said before. So Chris, what are some of the risks or the things that cyber criminals could do during the decryption process of the backup?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting story, right? When we get into cryptography, because crypto is really designed to provide a level of assurance and protection around both the integrity and the confidentiality of the data that you're trying to encrypt. And as adversaries get more sophisticated, we also have to get more sophisticated with our encryption algorithms. And a lot of people on the call have probably heard about kind of the next generation encryption algorithms, right? What we're using today is stronger than what we were using 10 years ago. And in 10 years, we're going to be using algorithms that are a lot stronger. Now, what came into the picture recently, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, is the quantum computing aspects, where, I think we have a potential risk whereby computers are going to be able to leverage specific processing power, specific compute mechanisms to be able to bypass encryption algorithms that today are considered very secure. So I think a lot of organizations are going through a motion right now of evaluating, especially in financials that are very regulated, to potentially evaluate moving from encryption algorithm A to encryption algorithm B. And as you're doing that, it's fantastic, right? I encourage everybody to look at that and certainly try and get stronger encryption around your data. But what a lot of organizations don't do, unfortunately, is a lot of that data that was encrypted at lower grade encryption levels before are still resident in backups from maybe 2 months ago, 6 months ago, even a year ago. So although your data that's live on the systems today may be protected with a very strong encryption algorithm, your backups may not be comparable from an encryption standard perspective. They may be using a lot less secure or a much weaker encryption scheme, which basically means that the adversaries, they don't have to go at your live data. They're just going to go after your backups because they know your backups are going to be the weaker encryption scheme, especially if they go back 6 or 12 months. And they're going to potentially be able to leverage those backups and vulnerabilities in the encryption on those backups to be able to retrieve your data. So the core message is, if you do move to a more secure mechanism, just make sure that your backups are catered for and that you're protecting your backups as well using that secure mechanism. If not, make sure that you securely delete and eradicate some of that data in those backups so that you don't have the weakest link out there anymore on your backup systems and your resiliency systems.
Definitely a lot of lessons we can learn from the past, especially from 2023. So now let's take a deep dive into 2024 and beyond. So the second part of this talk, we are going to address AI, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and some of your predictions for the future regarding the cyber threat landscape. So let's start with AI. Definitely is a trending topic. Every time we read a data sheet from a vendor, they say they have AI, they have incorporated machine learning as well in their solutions. But let's not forget the fact that cyber criminals are using AI as well. So Chris, is this a real threat, artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and you know that's another one of those things that you hear about a lot, right? You hear a lot about ransomware, but you hear a lot about AI as well. There's a lot of people and organizations are trying to use AI for good, right? They're trying to use it to help create efficiencies, to help look at huge data sets. But at the same time, you know, I think AI is not, excuse me, is not new. The concept of AI is not new. Machine learning has been around for a while. That's really just exploded from, you know, a recent perspective, looking at things like ChatGPT, language learning models, and Gen AI. But nation state adversaries, so very sophisticated cyber adversaries, they've been using AI and machine learning for many years. And in many cases, you know, they use that to successfully morph malicious codes, you know, understand the cause and effects of cyber campaigns a lot better, to be able to be more predictive in terms of whether their attacks are going to be successful. Because typically these are very long sustained campaigns, right? So they've been mining a lot of that data and running it through AI models there. I don't see a major shift in terms of the nation states and the advanced cyber adversaries because they've already been using AI. Where I think we're starting to see a shift is in the more cyber criminal oriented type of adversary. They're now able to weaponize their tactics a lot quicker and a lot more precise than they were before. If they're writing a phishing email, they can use Gen AI to pull in a variety of information to be able to make that a lot more effective in terms of hit rates. If they're looking to weaponize potential pieces of software or introduce vulnerabilities or even discover vulnerabilities, they can use Gen AI a lot quicker than they can do it manually. So, and then, well, actually, finally, also, I think, you know, from a deep fakes and a voice spoofing, we started seeing some inroads there as well with some of the attackers that are starting to use that. So I don't think it's there fully yet in terms of the full breadth of the capabilities of AI being used. I think it'll still be a few years down the road before we see cyber criminals use those type of things. So likely not an immediate change, but we do know that the ultimate tactic of the attacker, the ultimate goal of the attacker, is to be able to be accurate, be able to monetize quickly on their exploits, reach their objective a lot quicker, and AI is definitely going to allow them to do that. So any type of access they have to AI systems today, they'll be leveraging there as well.
So now we have access to lots and lots of information, and we have AI to our disposition in order to correlate that information. So people used to believe years ago that this information was the root cause of many issues. However, we have a lot of information now. It's not disinformation, it's misinformation. So Mauricio, how do you think this is a game changer in terms of cybersecurity?
Okay, thank you. The human element is present in many of the breaches. Almost 3/4 of all breaches, there was a human element that was exploited, and there's a couple of reasons that it's the, let's call it the weakest link. I think the human is the best thing ever, but let's call it the weakest link in cybersecurity, because how the brain works. So it's easy to fool or to convince, because the brain is always trying to look for something familiar, and of course, the adversaries, the bad actors have learned a lot of psychology and neurology and these sciences of how the brain works, and they're trying to exploit it. So we just this past week saw an attack that was deepfakes, very effective deepfakes, and they successfully convinced the treasurer or the financial officer of a company to move in a series of transactions $25 million. Now, this was in Zoom calls. Now, all of the Zoom people that were there were deepfakes of the CEO and other people. So yesterday I saw a presentation that they had a deepfake made so good that very, very difficult to detect. Now through let's say 10 people in the call where the images are quite small, it's easier to do that. So they had these deep fakes having a conversation about some project that everything made sense to the financial manager of this organization. I think it was a series of calls. So this was a very well planned attack, but it was $25 million. So the thing with AI is that the bad actors have access to these tools to produce deepfakes for voice and video. So credible that we'll have to rethink everything when we are talking to someone in the screen or in the telephone, because it might be a deepfake. So it's the combination of those abilities to reproduce voice and video and the inherent trust that we have on the face and voice of the human. And in Latin societies where there's a natural willingness to help, this is the perfect storm for new extortions and frauds. So it's the beginning. It's going to be really interesting how this develops. We saw that in the U.S. passed a law that robocalls, the automatic calls made by marketing, etc., are now cannot be deepfaked in the U.S. And that's a very light but initial law that will open the way to legislate how these technologies can be harnessed for good and not for bad as they're being used now.
Yeah, I remember reading about the cyber attackers in Korea. They created this with artificial intelligence. They impersonated this financial institution so it could have a conversation with a natural voice with the customers of that bank. So they could steal credentials, passwords, and tokens and everything, and then perform these transferences. So yeah, we starting to see some of the deep fakes, like you said, artificial intelligence attacks, and so on. So Chris, what about polymorphic malware? We know that this is some kind of malicious code that is going to change itself in order to circumvent the cyber defenses.
Yeah, I think the specific around polymorphic malware and it's that's always, it's kind of like a virus, right? When you have viruses that evolve, and we saw it with the recent pandemic, right? You have to kind of stay ahead of the next one. I think when it comes to malware, in the wild, while we have seen some examples, the vast majority of malware is still traditional malware, non-polymorphic. There is some morphing that typically goes on, but it's not the advanced AI capabilities of the morphing that you would expect. And the reason for that is because a lot of the existing malware and malicious codes continues to be effective at evading things like EDR or antivirus solutions. Now, we have started seeing some of the polymorphic malware make its way into some of the breaches, but it's very limited still, just because, like I said in the beginning, as long as existing tactics continue to work, an attacker is not going to change their modus of operandi, or their way of working, because it's very costly to start writing polymorphic malware and to start investing in that. And if you can do it very quickly with existing malware, that's the way the attackers are still going. But I do believe it's something that we need to watch out for in the coming years, and that is going to be a big challenge for antivirus and EDR solutions to make sure that they're staying ahead of that as well.
Thank you. So let's now talk about quantum computing. So a brief intro, traditional computing, 2 bits could be in 4 different states, 00, 11, 01, and 10. However, quantum computing uses the superposition principle, meaning that qubits, and not only bits, could be in different states at the same time. So this could exponentially speed up the process of decrypting information. So this question is for Mauricio. Even though we are not there yet in the post-quantum era, how this could be a game changer in terms of cybersecurity?
Oh boy, yes. I think Chris and you already started with this conversation earlier, but I'll try to jump in. So current cryptography is based on, let's call them one-way algorithms. Easy to go one way, very difficult to go the other way, like multiplication and factorization. Multiplying 2 big numbers, 2 big prime numbers, let's say 200 digits, is easy. Well, you could do it with almost any very, very limited computer. That is very easy. Now, factoring the result to obtain these 2 root numbers takes a lot of computational power, and normally years, decades, or more to be able to get it. And if it takes 40 years, by the time you decipher what the result is, the data is worthless. With computing, as you told, each qubit will represent all possible values simultaneously. So factoring becomes really, really fast. So all our algorithms of cryptography, as Chris was saying, the current algorithms will be worthless, because if the attacker has access to quantum computing, he will be able to decrypt, let's say within minutes or hours, what was thought that would take decades to decrypt. So we have to rethink. Chris already told it. We have to rethink all our encryption strategy, because this is coming. IBM and other companies already are having some prototypes working, and this is what we know of commercial companies. I am sure that governments are in that race and investing a lot of money to be the first. So it won't be long before this changes everything.
Yes, and this leads us to the type of attack that is called harvest now and decrypt later. So Chris, what can you tell us about it? Meaning that the cyber criminals are exfiltrating that data, even though it is encrypted, and they are waiting for the quantum computing to decrypt that data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And historically, when threat actors would compromise systems, they would generally focus on the type of data that they could see, plain text data or unencrypted data. And that's because if you grab ciphertext or encrypted data, that would generally take too long, whether that's years or even decades, to decrypt to prove useful for the attackers, right? If you have a piece of data that's encrypted with something that may take 10 years to decrypt, but that data is only relevant to you for the next 2 or 3 years. And there's no use getting that data typically, because that by the time you decrypt it, that information might already be public. But over the past few years, we have seen a shift in adversary tactics. Generally, the nation state attackers, they're now going in and they're exfiltrating not only plain text or clear text data, they're starting to exfiltrate fairly large amounts of what would be considered encrypted data or cryptographically protected data. And the hypotheses that we're working on is that these nation states will have the capability to successfully decrypt that data sets within a time frame during which that information is still relevant, right? So right now, if you have information that's encrypted and it would take, today's encryption 10 years to decrypt, and that information is only relevant for 3 years, you should be fine. But we are seeing those attackers now exfiltrate those types of data sets, meaning that they're fairly confident that based upon advances in computing, they may be able to decrypt this information in much less time, at which point that would still be relevant to them. So that's a worrying sign that behind the scenes, a lot of organizations and governments are investing in this type of technology. And these are the adversaries that we need to worry about. And that's why we need to make sure that we're encrypting and continuing to re-encrypt as appropriate with stronger algorithms, and removing the older algorithms from the backups as well, because we know based upon some changes in patterns from the threat actors that it is coming, and it's coming a lot quicker than potentially we think.
Okay, excellent. So we already covered AI, quantum computing. We're going to talk about a little bit cloud security and the challenges we may face. It's funny that some organizations used to believe, I hope it's not the case still, that moving to the cloud, they were going to protect the data and they were going to be protected from most of the cyber attacks. We already know it's not the case, but what are some of the challenges that these organizations trying to move to the cloud could face? And this question is for you, Mauricio.
Okay. I think that we still do not understand completely. So the main challenge will be the lack of knowledge. Most of us learned IT and security on-premise worlds, and the cloud is different, and we have to relearn and readapt our way of doing IT and processes and everything in the cloud. And if we insist on using the same processes and the same knowledge to do IT in the cloud, we're in it for a surprise. So that's one. The other is many organizations have not really understood the shared responsibility model, and they're over trusting the cloud, assuming that they will take care of everything. And then, of course, there's this is a group of companies that will be providing the infrastructure and the services and the software and everything for a business process. And these business processes will definitely are important for the businesses. Otherwise, they wouldn't be engaging in such. And we need to see these all these providers, the cloud provider, the internet providers, the software providers, as part of our supply chain. A couple of days ago, we had a conference about supply chain risk, and this is extremely important. This is part of it, and big part of that conference was about that. So supply chain risk in cyber is very important because, I don't know, things will happen in the cloud, or things will happen to the cloud. And we must be aware of that, and we must have our resiliency plans taking into account that maybe we're not able to get to our data that is in one of the cloud providers. Maybe the cloud provider had an incident and our data is unavailable or lost. So we should be thinking of the cloud provider or the cloud providers, because it's many organizations in the chain, as part of the risk that we have to evaluate and make our provisions for it. So many people think that once I'm in the cloud, I have to do things differently, but I'm good. Yeah, but things might happen, and we have had some too big to fail problems in the past, in other areas, and I'm sure that cyber or IT is not exempt of that. Too big to fail will not happen. Things happen, and if we are in within that provider, mm, maybe we lose our data.
Yeah, and one of the most common services we might use from cloud providers is Office 365. Even the US government uses Office 365. So, Chris, what can you tell us about this group of hackers that claim that they hacked the US government via a vulnerability they found in Office 365?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think somewhat the story there goes based upon what's publicly been released from an information perspective is that, you know, these attackers, which were nation state adversaries from the Far East, they were able to, they claimed they were able to get into email accounts belonging to a variety of U.S. government entities because they were all hosted on an Office 365 environment. So when the investigation was done by Microsoft, what it appears to be is that they were able to actually get access to the servers with basically a master API key, a master token that they were able to connect directly to Office 365 and download the mailboxes. So obviously everybody tried to figure it out. How did they manage to get this master key? And what seems to have happened is that on these systems, there had been an upgrade that had been done previously, the software update on the cloud environment that had failed and caused a crash dump, and that crash dump was stored in an insecure location, and the attackers were able to get access to that crash dump and extract the physical the security key, logical security key from that crash dump, and then we're able to replay that to be able to get access to the environment. And that's just why it's so important to make sure that you obviously, even though you house your information in something that's a secure cloud, that you always still have the potential of it being somebody else's systems. You're not transferring the risk, right? Your information's still potentially at risk, but you're transferring the problem potentially to another organization. And that's why this is good hygiene, right? If there had been better hygiene, potentially those things were protected better, or there would have been ways to delete that information, then this attack may not have happened, right? But yeah, it's certainly worrisome.
So the key piece of security was stored in an insecure place. That's very interesting, and we can derive a lesson from that. So let's talk about the final point, predictions. Mauricio, would you venture to say your predictions for the cyber threat landscape?
Okay, I did not bring my crystal ball, but the good thing of living in a third world country in technology is that we see things in the first world happen before in our world. So that is the good things and the not so good things. And as we spoke a couple of minutes ago, there is some lag in our territory of what is happening. So what has been successful for the adversaries in the first world will continue to be successful for us eventually. So if in US and Europe, ransomware still a big problem, and email compromise and pretexting is still a big problem, I see more of the same here. I don't see that there will be changes in our region. And since I am from this region, I cannot talk about the world, but I can talk about our region. But we have been seeing some increase in fraud because the general population is using the new digital services that many companies are providing. Banks and many retailers are giving more and more digital services to the users. But these users are, we'll call them analphabet users, digitally analphabet users. We have not taught them correctly. And so they're easily tricked. And we're seeing a lot of fraud there. And some other things that are happening locally in the fraud arena, but the banks and the financial industry is taking care fast about this. But one of the things that we must is to educate, to make digitally capable education for all our people, because when there's this breach, this gap between the services that are being offered by the organization, the government, may be private, and analphabet users, digitally analphabet users, there's this gap is the way to the fraudsters are using to trick the users and commit their fraud. So definitely. And the other thing is, as long as, going back to the beginning, as long as we do not teach all the risks or to the boards, cyber risk will be a big problem until we are able to do that.
So the most important software we need to be constantly updating is the human brain, like you have stated in previous talks. So thank you for that. Chris, what do you foresee?
Patches to the brain.
Yeah. So Chris, what do you foresee in the near future regarding the cyber threat landscape?
Yeah, no, I think a few things, right? So I think, from my predictions or how things are evolving, I see them in three different areas. One, the cyber threat landscape, I would say, geopolitical threats continue to be prevalent. We're seeing it in the Middle East, in Ukraine-Russia conflict. So that's going to continue, and that's probably even going to get worse. Ransom as a topic, and ransomware being one of those, will continue to be a concern as well. And that's going to start increasing a lot from a speed of attacks perspective. We're seeing that happen a lot faster. The increased reliance on cloud providers means that cloud infrastructures are going to become a lot more targeted as well. And then greater third and fourth party risk continues to be a concern that I alluded to earlier. From a regulatory perspective, we're seeing that all of these data breaches that you hear about all of the time and these high profile security events are driving increased new regulatory scrutiny. We're seeing it within the United States with the Security Exchange Commission regulations, in EMEA with the NIS2 and DORA standards, with the new PCI standards. They're driving for additional scrutiny. And not only are they doing that, they're also increasing the liability that a CISO or somebody at a leadership decision-making position in an organization can now be held personally liable for non-compliance, which can result in significant fines or even criminal prosecution with jail time for executives. And just being compliant is no longer good enough. You need to be able to manage risk, understand your risk, and be able to constantly look at your risk landscape. And then finally, from a technology landscape, what we're seeing from an evolution perspective is organizations are leaning a lot on AI and Gen AI for efficiency. They're starting to look at that on how they can drive that forward. But oftentimes, security is an afterthought in that. It needs to be part of the process from the beginning. And that's why secure by design is now an expectation. And organizations have to adapt to make sure that they're bringing security into the beginning of the process. And then finally, I think a lot of governments are starting to lean in a lot more proactively in exerting security best practices into both public and private sector. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that with some of the regulation coming down the pike.
Well, Chris, Mauricio, it's been an honor being here with you guys today talking about this interesting topic. And to the audience, thank you as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. A great privilege to be with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Likewise. Thank you, gentlemen.
Spanish really quickly. En un agradecimiento a todos los que han estado con nosotros estas conferencias, les agradecemos profundamente. Para nosotros es súper importante poder no solo compartir lo que nosotros hemos aprendido, sino compartir con personas como Chris y algunos otros invitados que tuvimos, que nos pueden traer muchísima información muy relevante, muy valiosa, que de otra manera no tendríamos acceso. Así es que les agradecemos a todos, esperamos que haya sido de beneficio para todas estas conferencias y esperamos verlos el año entrante. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Chris. Gracias, Irwin.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.